In this demo, we want to write a program to find the most occurring element in an array of integers. So we're gonna start by declaring a vector of integer values and initialize it with a couple of numbers. In the first attempt, we are going to do the simplest things that might come to the mind. So we're gonna use a nested loops in which the first iterator is just gonna iterate over different elements, and for each element counts the number of occurring of that element. So when we are iterating our first index, we're gonna count the number of occurrence of 4, which is 2. So we need to declare a variable count here, and in each iteration we are going to set it to 0, and in the inner loop we need to iterate from 0 to a.size, and if a at I was equal to a at j, we're going to increase the count. We also need to declare a variable to keep the maximum count, and we can initialize it with -1. So after this loop, we know the number of occurrence of the value at index I. So we need to compare the count, and if the count is greater than max count, we are going to update max count. So far we have the count of the most occurring element, but we also need to keep the element itself. So we can declare most occurring and initialize it with a at position 0. And each time that we update max count, we're gonna update most occurring with a at I. So let's just print the results. So the most occurring element is 8, and the number of occurrence is 5. As an alternative, we can declare another integer vector and keep the counts in it. So this way we are gonna have a vector of the same size as a, and compiler will initialize it with 0. So in this loop, instead of counting and updating the max count, we are gonna keep the counts at this vector. So for each element, we are going to count the number of occurrence, and we just keep them in count at that index. Let's print the results. So we have number of occurrence of each element in this vector. Now we can just find the maximum in this array. You also need to keep max index. So whenever the count of the current element is greater than max count, we are going to update max count, and also we are going to set max index to I. After this loop, we know the index of most occurring element. So we can just print it with A at max index. So when we find the count of most occurring element, we also find the index, and so we can find the element itself by accessing the first array at index max index. So we have the same result as before. The 8 is the most occurring element, and the number of occurrences is 5. Now we want to write a program to find and print all unique elements of a given array. We can use the same program and just output the elements that their count is 1. So if we want to do that, in this loop, if count at I is equal to 1, we are going to print A at I. So the unique elements are 2 and 3. But we don't need to keep the counts here. We can just check if the element is unique or not by keeping a true and false. So let's change this vector to a Boolean vector of size a.size and initialize its values with true. So at first we assume that all the elements are unique. And then as soon as we see that another element is equal to the element, and as long as I is not equal to j, we are gonna update the elements of unique vector at position I to false. So when we see another occurrence of the element except itself, we are gonna set unique at I to false. Now here we are gonna iterate over elements of unique, and for any index for which unique at that index is true, we are gonna output the corresponding integer from the first vector. So we got the same result here.